Kia ora, hello, welcome to the latest episode in our series Construction and Evolution of Medieval Garments, entitled Construction of a Hood, Medieval Style. Medieval tailors did not have access to the same tools as we have today for making garments and creating patterns. They did share with us some of the same simple tools such as needles, pins, sewing thread, rulers and tailor's chalk. They created the shapes for garments using only these resources. In the interests of experimental archaeology, it's my aim today to try to create a buttoned hood very similar to the one found in London from the late 14th century, using only the tools and techniques we know were available to the medieval tailor from that period. I'm Ocean, and this is Populaurbanum, a show where we discuss reenactment and the medieval middle class. There have been quite a few extant hoods found from the late 14th century, the London hood being only one of them, and several others having been found in Greenland from around the same time. There was another found in Dordrecht from the Netherlands apparently, although unfortunately I couldn't find any details about that particular one. They all have certain things in common, so I'm going to try to construct a hood that has similarities with these. It's intended to be a garment for use in a Northern European, working class, feminine impression, so it will be very plain without any fancy details. In the modern day, we often use paper and body measurements to draft patterns, conceptualizing a two-dimensional material wrapping around a three-dimensional body. Another way of fitting a two-dimensional material around a three-dimensional form is to simply drape it directly onto the form, and that's a method I'm going to use today. The reason I won't be using paper patterns is because paper was not likely in common use in Europe around 1400 current era, so it would not make sense to use large pieces of paper to create patterns for garments if we're trying to emulate medieval tailors. I'll be making my hood from one layer of very thick blue twill wool with quite a springy, fluffy texture. Because of this, I'll be combining some of the finishing techniques from late 14th century Greenland as well as from London. The garments from Greenland were made from thick woolen fabric called vodmal, and therefore those specialty sewing techniques will be useful for some aspects of this project. We can't be expected to get a well-fitting result when draping a hood on the body without the appropriate garments and hairstyle underneath. We need some idea of the neckline and the volume of hair, etc. under the hood, which for me is a kirtle and temple braids. I take my piece of fabric, this is the front edge, which frames the face, and I've marked a perpendicular line on there with some pins. That's the centre line of my head. So I place that on my head in preparation to pin it and drape it, ensuring that the centre line is aligned with the centre of my head. I put a pin underneath my chin, making sure that the sides of my face opening are even. Continue to place pins underneath the chin carefully, so there's a little row of pins there, making sure that it's not too tight. Pull up the back of the centre line so it's pointing straight out, and pinch it at the back of the head. Put a pin in at this point. You're creating a vertical line coming straight down from the top of the back of your head and then following the curve of the back of your head down towards the base of your skull. Now that's done and sitting nicely, just check that you can fold back the front of the hood comfortably, because this is something that many medieval people did with their hoods. Now we'll pin the front of the chest. Make a line of pins from the throat down the front of the chest to the bottom of the hem of the cape of the hood. Now you need to mark in the top of your shoulder gores, one on each side. This is where a triangular gore will be inserted, such as those in the London hoods and the Greenland hoods. The next thing is to mark out the hem of your hood cape, beginning with the shoulder points. This is the pointiest top part of your shoulder. Now join the shoulder point in a curve with the lower part of the front of the chest that you marked out before. Done! Now you need to mark where your pins are under your chin, because you'll be removing those pins to get out of the draped fabric. Just take your time with this. Can't quite see what I'm doing. Aha! With the magic of modern technology. If you want to, this is a good time to add chalk to the line of pins marking the hem. Now it's time to remove the pins under the chin. If you'd like to put them back into the chalk line so that they're in the fabric but no longer holding the two sides together, you can do that. Chalk lines don't tend to last a very long time. There you have it, an outline of a hood in the making. You see the back of the head, the gore position, the front chin, and the front hem. Now it's time to refine the lines that we just made while draping. We have the front edge, the back of the head, the base of the skull, the front chin and neck, and the gore slit position. Let's compare with a couple of extant examples from Greenland to find out what direction the gore insertion slit should be cut. These extant examples are typical of the late 14th century in that they all have the slit parallel with the front face opening. So that's what we're going to do. Locate the average point between the right and left point at the top of the gore. So mine was slightly different on each side, so I will take the point in between the right and left side as my top of gore insertion slit. And make sure that I draw a line from there that is parallel with the face opening. And I want that line to be about the same length as the chin to chest measurement. Then I can sketch in a rough shape for the back of the neck cape. And I can create something a little more solid for that by measuring the exact distance, which is the chin to chest measurement. I then extend that out the back. Leave yourself plenty of fabric if you don't know exactly how big that needs to be. You can trim it later. You'll notice that I just solidified the line of pins at the back of the head with a chalk line. Here is your quarter circle shoulder gore. I've used a paper pattern adapted from the London hood in this case, but a medieval tailor wouldn't have been using paper patterns. Most likely your historical options would be to use a square of fabric and then trim it into a quarter circle after you've inserted it into the gore slit, or you can cut a quarter circle freehand and insert that. Don't forget to add a little extra seam allowance under the chin for your buttons and buttonholes when you're cutting out your pattern. Add seam allowance all around if you haven't already, and quite a lot of extra seam allowance at the hem, especially if you would like to cut a dagged edge, which is a common feature seen in medieval manuscripts. The buttoned hood seems to have been a feminine style. There are only a few depictions and one or two accounts of women wearing dagged hoods, so they may not have been a common part of the feminine wardrobe. However, if you're making a closed hood using this method, go ahead and cut dags, but make sure you have enough room left under the chin to fit your head through. See the book Textiles and Clothing, 1150 to 1450, details below, for an extant method of cutting dags. Here are the materials I'm using to finish my hood. We have linen sewing thread, tabby linen fabric facings, handmade wool buttons and 2-ply wool yarn for felling seams. This is the first fitting of the hood. At this stage, the back head seam has been stitched up from top to the base of the skull, and the shoulder gores have been inserted. None of the seams have been felled yet. Check the fit on the front opening and try to figure out how the centre back seam will fall upon the shoulders and how it will be shaped. Get some help with this part or it will be very time consuming, but you can do it on your own if you need to. Just check that front opening seam and make adjustments with pins and chalk as needed. Don't make it too tight or it will be uncomfortable when you wear it. Now is a great time to make adjustments to the length of the hem, and if you're going to add some dagging to the hem, now is a good time to plan it. Now the centre back seam is all stitched and felled, and the gores have been felled as well. The front face opening has been hemmed with overcast stitches and stab stitching in the 2-ply wool yarn with a seam allowance of approximately 7mm. It's also time to sew on the buttons and do the buttonholes. There, they're done, and the buttonholes are finished too. Now it's time to cut the hem of the hood cape, which I chalked on during a fitting. Pin the left and right sides together so that the equivalent parts of the hood are laying flat on top of each other. For example, the tops of the gores should be pinned together and the front edges should be sitting on top of one another, and so on. This means that when you cut the hem where it's marked on one side, the other side will be cut in exactly the same place. Now the hem has been stitched using overcast stitches with filler threads and stab stitching. Filler threads were used to draw in the hem of the hood cape because it was fluting and curling slightly, and I wanted it to fit on my shoulders snugly. Else Oostergaard says in her book Woven into the Earth that this technique was used for this purpose. Oops, I forgot to add a liripipe. I've cut 2 pieces of the same fabric. I've joined them down one long edge with the right sides together using a running stitch. Then I've used a different technique to close the tube. I've turned the tube of fabric through so that the wrong sides of the fabric are together, in other words the right way around, and then tucked in the seam allowances before making a stitch line in the same way as done for some of the Greenland garments. This technique was described by Else Ostergaard in her book and also explored in a video by Company of the Staple, which I link below. This technique of stitching is essentially very much like a modern slip stitch, but it creates a strong enough seam for this purpose. Continue all the way along the lyra pipe. I stitched it in using a back stitch and then refelled the seams. There you have it. My hood is now finished and I'm quite happy with it. I've wanted a hood in this style for some time, and although it was a lot of fine detailing for such a deceptively simple garment, I think it's well worth the effort. I'm reasonably happy with the fit of the hood, and although there were things I would do differently next time, such as fitting the centre back seam more carefully, perhaps leaving a little more room in front of the chin, and a couple of other things, I'm reasonably happy with the outcome. Please feel free to comment with your anecdote, expertise, or experience down below. And thank you for watching. Oh hey, I didn't see you there. I guess this means you must have enjoyed the video, so have fun, stay safe, and keep reenacting.